All right, so now that we're kind of familiar with all of the different field types and what they do within Dato, I think it's time we stop confusing ourselves making really structures. So hang on while I kind of delete all the crap we've done so far, and then we'll build out some real models that we would use for the project moving forward, keeping the context in mind that we're building out something like a very simple SaaS B2B website. All right, so now that we've gotten all that trash out of the way, let's maybe work together and build out maybe three blocks together. Now, keeping in mind that the project we're starting to set up is going to be that of a sort of B2B SaaS website, what are some common blocks that we can foresee ourselves using? Probably something like a logo reel, which is commonly found on home pages or other landing pages to showcase featured customers. Maybe something like a testimonial that could be a video testimonial or a quote that we can eventually associate to case studies. And maybe something like a contact info block, which can be kind of agnostic in how it's used. It could be connected to an author, it could be connected to a press contact, or even to the person giving us a testimonial for the case study. So let's go ahead and create the first one. Let's start with logo reel, given it's the easiest I can think of. What would we typically have? You would probably have some sort of a flashy tagline that says we're trusted by X number of customers. You'd have the logos themselves. And let's assume that our final website would be in dark mode and light mode. So you'd probably want the logos as well to be able to adapt that and control this via the CMS. So let's maybe give this a quick icon. So one thing to note is within Dato, the more you build out blocks and models, it can get quite overwhelming to see all of them in the sidebar. So having a little bit of an emoji icon to differentiate them is certainly quite helpful. And since we generate suggestions from AI, which has not been trained on logos a lot, let's just go ahead and use the Trident. So now that we have a logo reel, let's set up the fields. We said that we wanted to have the logos themselves first. So this is where we'd use the media field and have an asset gallery. So we could have multiple logos. Under the validations, maybe we want to follow the rules of three, right? So you can only have them in 3, 6, 9, so on and so forth. So let's assume we want a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 24, but they have to appear in multiples of 3. So we can publish 3 logos or 18 logos, but we can't publish 7. And finally, we don't need to have anything on the presentation. Maybe just a note to myself is to please try and use SVGs, although I'll probably forget this at that point. And then we said we wanted to have a tagline. So we wouldn't want any fancy formatting. So maybe let's stick with a single line string here. It would also help us for internal reference when searching for this logo reel. And we'll keep this as required because it would be kind of strange if the logos just showed up on the homepage without any context. We'd also maybe want to limit our character count to no more than 150, so we don't have long paragraphs showing up there. And I guess we could keep the rest of it as is. And let's go ahead and save this. And finally, we said we wanted to kind of control whether it was dark mode or not. So there's 2 ways we could achieve something like this. We could have a Boolean, which is just going to be, is this logo reel for the dark mode or not, for example? Or we could be a little more flexible and have colors. And given that we're already working with SVGs, we could have certain rules on the front end to recolor these. So let's maybe give it a shot with the color field. Let's go ahead and have colors with a validation of this being required. Our website by default would be in light mode. So let's go ahead and keep black as the default value here. And oops, let's go back to edit that, with the default value being black. And maybe we want to give our editors 2 options. So choose one of the 2 colors. We would have black and white. And there we have it. That's a very simple block that we've put together for what the logo reel would look like. So now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and create another one for the testimonial. Drop a chat bubble. A testimonial would typically have details about the person in the case study, but we don't want this. What we want to do in the future is have one sort of model for a person who could be an author, who could be a customer, who could be a press contact. And we want to eventually update those models with content on their different use cases. So let's assume that we already have a person existing. And we would want to reference them to just the testimonial in the future. So in this case, the testimonial itself could only have the content that's talking about the product or talking about the case study. And what we typically have here is either a quote, if this is a text testimonial, or something like a video, if we've managed to have a recording with the person. So let's go ahead and give ourselves both those options. To start off with, let's go with the structured text, where we'd have something like a quote. And the reason I'm choosing structured text here and not something like a multi-paragraph is maybe I'd want to add styling, or maybe in the future I'd want to embed a few things, right? If they're talking about a certain use case, I might have a use case model in the future, and I could just reference that use case within the structured text field itself, rather than having to work around HTML and linking to the URL and so on and so forth. So you could also think ahead in what flexibility you might need in the future and kind of future-proof your content modeling approach to just give you the ability to manage that when the time comes. For the validations, we won't keep anything required simply because we aren't sure yet if this testimonial is going to be a video or just a quote, but we would want to limit the character count. So let's make sure we're not publishing something too long and keep it at a maximum of 350 characters. So we'll go ahead and save this, and for the other option, give ourselves the ability to have a video. Now, we could have two options here as well. Either we could upload the video and have control over it ourselves, or we could upload that testimonial to another platform like YouTube and just reference the video on another platform. But let's assume we would have full control over all of our assets moving forward. So let's choose the single asset here and just have video as the name. And again, we won't keep this required, but we could be a little more specific to ourselves and keep and a sort of list of what extensions we want to accept here. So just to be safe, let's go ahead and add MP4, which is the format we would be using in all of our videos moving forward, and keep this as a required specified extension. You could also have the option to choose different formats. If I wanted other video formats like an MOV or anything else, I could just choose video and it would accept all possible video options. But for this case, let's just keep it specific to an MP4. So let's go ahead and save this. And finally, let's create our last block here, which we said would be the contact info. So this is something we could finally associate with authors, with press contacts, with office locations, with customers, with anything that might be a person or a place. And we don't want to sort of create those fields every time we create that model, right? So let's go ahead and save this and add a few very commonly available ones like an address, an image, maybe an email and phone number, and so on. The first thing I'll do, however, is give ourselves an internal reference, because in the future, if we're going through multiple contact infos, maybe we want to find them with an internal name or a label that we give ourselves, which we would want to keep required. Once we have this in place, let's go ahead and maybe use the location field for an address. For the validations, we don't necessarily need these required, but it would be nice to maybe have a default fallback. So I can't spell. So let's go with Florence and save this. Maybe we can add something like an email address after this. So let's go ahead and have the option for an email using the validation of an email. And go ahead and add another text field for something like a Twitter profile using the validation of a URL. Once we've got this, maybe we'd also want something like a phone number, in which case we could also utilize the number field and since phone numbers cannot be in decimals, we'll go ahead with an integer and call it a phone with a validation of, no, we don't really need any of this, but we could just go ahead and accept phone numbers here. And finally, we might want an image. This could be an avatar for a person. It could be a location photo for something like an office address. We could go ahead and add a single asset here and just have an image without any validations. And maybe a last one could be something like a description or a bio. So let's go ahead and use the structure text field for a bio here, which could be anything like the sort of bio of an author. It could be maybe a description about an office location, talking about how to get there, what the public transport options are, and so on. And we can go ahead and save this. So what we've essentially done here using a combination of multiple field types is have a block for a logo reel, which eventually will be part of multiple page models. We've got the testimonial, which would be part of case studies, but also referenced to something like an author model in the future. And we've created a contact info block, which is then going to be part of locations for things like storefronts or office locations, but it's also going to be a part of the person model for things like, again, authors and customers and so on.